Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the IvyHacks VC and Startup panel. We'll give it just a few minutes before we get started. Until then, we have the Q&A channel that was open, just like in other talks. Feel free to start tossing questions in there. This panel will be very interactive, so ask away and ask things to your heart's content in terms of startups and VCs.
Hey there.
Hey, hey.
Will, are you also on this panel with me? Is that right?
I am. Great to cross
Great to
paths so
meet you.
soon.
All right, we'll get started in just a few minutes. Okay, few minutes in. We have a great hour, so why don't we hop right in? So thanks everyone for attending. For anyone who isn't able to watch this and is watching this offline, welcome. My name is Mohb. I am the co-director of IvyHacks and a current student at Harvard. And it is a distinct pleasure to welcome a lot of amazing folks from both the VC space and the startup space. And we're really interested in bringing both sort of groups together, specifically because they're almost two sides of the same coin. And I hope that through hearing everyone's stories on the panel today and getting to ask some questions, we get to uncover a little bit of both sides of that coin. So without further ado, I think it'd be great if we could just go around and panelists, if you could just give a little brief intro of who you are, maybe starting with you, Garrett.
Sure. Hi, I'm Garrett, co-founder of Sora Schools. We are a new virtual high school that's on a mission to build, really from the ground up, the gold standard in online learning. So yeah, that's me.
Perhaps I can go next? Or?
Yes, absolutely.
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Will. I'm an investor at Contrary. We're a fund that identifies top early career talent and invests in companies that they start or join. So people come to Contrary to kind of raise money for companies out of school, early in the career, and they also come to us to go find jobs at awesome high growth startups.
I'm happy to go next. Hi, I'm Jomayra. I am an investor over at Cowboy Ventures. We are a seed stage focused fund based out in the Bay Area, focused on leading and co-leading seed rounds. I started my career as an operator and happy to talk about that transition, and then went to go work and invest in and build the Jobs family office before joining Cowboy about a year ago.
Awesome. Is that me next? Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Madison. I work at Defy VC. We're an early stage venture firm in the Bay Area as well. We invest at kind of seed, Series A across technology innovation with a focus on consumer, enterprise SaaS, and deep tech. And I came from Gap, where I was doing product management on our global supply chain team, and originally went to Dartmouth. So excited about this group.
All right, I think I'm next, maybe. Hi, I'm Erin. I work at Neurable. I'm the product marketing manager and helping them out with kind of their next fundraise. Previously, I've worked at early stage startups, anything from Filament to Elliott to did some work with 8 Sleep. So kind of bounced back and forth. I actually made the transition from a creative agency working with startups to in-house. So kind of a different approach there.
Great. And did we miss anyone? I think that covers all of us. Garrett, Will, Jomayra, Madison, and Erin. Thanks so much for joining. We certainly have a good set of questions here, and want to emphasize, we can take this wherever we all want to take it. I think a great question to start off with is for folks that maybe are not as familiar with the US startup scene or just sort of the tech scene overall, whether you're a VC or from the startups kind of space, if you could talk us just a bit throughout how you got to where you are right now, either how you got to the startup that you're at, or what was your journey to becoming a VC, whatever that may mean to you. So if anyone wants to take a stab at that first, of just their journey, that'd be great.
I'm happy to take a first stab at this one. So I'm originally from Orlando, Florida, and there was really no startup or tech scene in Orlando, and I didn't know about venture investing at all. I came out to the Bay Area for school with I'm the first in my family to go to college, with the plan to either be a doctor, lawyer, and engineer, because that's what you do when you're the first in your family to go to college. I was not good at math or science. The only science I was good at was political science, and so I went with lawyer. The morning of the LSAT came, and I could not get myself to actually go and take it, because when I thought about where I was spending all of my time, extra time, it was never in anything related to law school. So it was actually always spending time in schools and working with students. So I went to go get my graduate degree, and I promise this long story has a meaning at the end. I went to go get my graduate degree in education, and then I started my career, like I mentioned, on the operating side. So I went to go work at an ed tech startup. One of our angel investors actually happened to be Lorraine Powell Jobs and her brother, and they reached out to me and were like, hey, we're building out a family office, and we are building out the investment team. One of the core areas we care about is education. Would you want to join? Again, I knew nothing about venture investing other than the fact that I was a venture-backed company, and knew nothing really about investing in general or startups other than having worked at startups. But the idea of deploying capital to issues I care about resonated with me. So I joined, helped build a family office to become a multi-asset family office, and just fell in love with the idea of deploying capital to drive change in areas that you care about. So when the opportunity came to join Cowboy, where I could focus at the earliest stages in companies and help define the core DNA of the company, and again, continue to deploy capital to areas that I care about, it really resonated with me. So that's my very weird, windy, unconventional, non-conventional journey.
I actually really like that because I took a very windy, unconventional journey myself. So I'm going to kind of piggyback off of that. I started as a journalist, which is, if you work in tech, journalists in tech notoriously have a controversial background, which is another, that's a story for another day. But I started as a journalist. So I actually have an undergraduate and a master's degree in journalism. So again, very indirect route. I initially worked as a journalist for about 6 months and I hated it. I was covering local court. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, so not Silicon Valley at all. And then I went to college in Reno, Nevada, again, not Silicon Valley. And right out of my undergraduate, worked as a journalist. Then I was like, ooh, I'm gonna go work in advertising. Stumbled in that, my very first job in advertising, again, absolutely hated, very traditional. I made 72 banner ads a week. It was my first job out of my undergrad, hated it. Later, took a job at another agency, the agency did a lot of work, and they were based in New York and Reno, Nevada. So I was working with a lot of startup clients, and one of my jobs became writing pitch decks because that journalism narrative story background really helped me craft stories for startups. One day at the agency, I was approached by one of our startups and they said, you're really good at this. Do you want to roll in-house? And it was for a blockchain company. And I was like, sounds good. So it was a yes, figure it out as I go. Did not know anything about startups other than I was many times the person designing the pitch deck and writing pitch decks and designing websites. So it was a very, again, non-traditional entry point. I wanted to focus more on kind of media-backed startups. So I went to graduate school at NYU. My focus is on media innovation. So really studied companies that are founded on the internet and media companies. So I got to do some work with the Financial Times on that, which again, have a weird relationship. So I play at that intersection. And then it kind of landed me working more in commerce, seeing the relationship between online businesses. And then now have ended up at Neurable because of Twitter connections. So yeah, you never know your life's gonna go. Be nice to everybody. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump here. I think, everybody I've ever talked to has had kind of their own serendipitous path into venture or startups. And I think I was kind of no different, where back in high school, I was kind of this, classic nerdy kid, learned to code, worked on a ton of projects. Didn't really have kind of hackathons, where I went to high school. So just, worked on a bunch of stuff of my own, studied CS in college. And it's been a couple years focused on that stuff. But, I'd always been interested in startups, had worked on a ton of things on the side. Joined a couple companies, just doing a little bit of everything. And ultimately, I think the reason I joined Eric Contra is that this is kind of a way to go both build and invest, and talk to a lot of people doing a lot of different things. And so, basically, I spent a lot of time in my internships, for example, in college. I'd be writing software was my real job, and then I'd spend 2 hours a day grabbing coffee with people in sales and product and marketing and everything, right? And you can kind of do that stuff and get away with it. And so that was super helpful to me, and kind of partly how I ended up here.
Let's eat some poha.
Might need to mute.
Alaska.
But I can hop in here. I feel like everyone's sharing how there is really no one path into the world that we all inhabit. And I think that's very true. And for me, what helped me go into venture was following my passions. And so I'd actually grown up in Seattle, where tech was everywhere, still is, and use things like finding a fashion blog in high school, and then going on to intern at Theory in New York in the e-commerce department as little entrance into the world I was ogling from my high school world. And then when I went to Dartmouth, it felt like everyone was going into investment banking and consulting. And so I thought that's what I had to do as well. So did some internships in finance, and just did not feel it was giving me the energy that got me out of bed in the morning to get to do my best work. And so then, since I still had some time, thought, where can I intern that I'm going to learn more about that original passion of mine, which was retail technology. And so found myself at The Runway, where I loved what I did. I worked for the fashion team and got to go to market and Fashion Week and all these things. That was very glamorous, but then realized actually my passion was on the technology side and enabling new consumer experiences. So from there, I minored in human-centered design and engineering at Dartmouth, and took that to do product management at Gap, which is a technology like job that you don't necessarily have to have a coding background for. It probably helps. I didn't, and had to learn a lot on the job, but then ultimately like fell into a pretty decent grasp of how to build back-end e-commerce infrastructure. And that is one area in which Defy invests. And so when I met the team, there was a lot of synergies between how they were looking at investing in the next generation of technology, and things I wanted to continue helping to solve for that I saw were real problems at Gap that no one was solving. And so when I joined the team as their associate, it was just like a really good way to get to know more about what's happening on the early stage. But I came from Gap Inc., which is like a publicly traded fashion company. So there's no straight path, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if anything is clear, it's that though we may be in similar fields now, from fashion to hardcore making to journalism, we've all sort of come from different walks of life to sort of find things that we're really interested in. And I think it's great that we're converging on something closer. I think one thing that would be great is that now that we've understood sort of where you've come from, now that you're in your current positions, be it as a VC or in that kind of space or as a startup, what kind of misconceptions do you think that other people have, but perhaps more profoundly that you had going into it? What were your impressions of what your job was going to be? And did anything surprise you about finally becoming a VC or a co-founder? Curious to see what was the before or after, now that you're sort of in the thick of it. If anyone on the startup side wants us to go first, and then we can move into the VC side.
Oh, I have a couple of misconceptions I had. One, that you need to code. So I know a little bit, but there is a notorious incident that I have past coworkers that'll tell me the time that I took our agency site offline for your sellers because I was attempting to code. So don't do that. We leave development better to developers now. And also I've learned how to QA a lot better. So again, that was something I did at an agency a while back. It was rough, but luckily it was nothing that was really much more than it was. I think that was a huge misconception, and do not underestimate your communication skills. So one of the best advices that I got from someone when I was getting into startups was, and just communicating in general, was not ever let someone wait for you. So if you, it's a good handshake. It's a back and forth. Like if you're going to throw a ball, you don't want to stand there and be the person with holding the ball. You want to be like, hey, like confirming, like got your email confirming this is what I'm working on. Here's my plan of attack. And that doesn't always mean just saying yes. Like it's like, no, this isn't a good fit at this time, or no, I'm really busy, or no is a complete sentence. And I think that's later on in my career, like again, my early misconceptions were you have to code, you have to be able to work all night. You're going to be the only female in the office, like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those are all things like I have better work-life balance at a startup than I did at an agency. So that's really cool things. But the communication skills, I use my skills coming from a journalism background probably like every day.
It could be good to hear from Garrett on this. I know you just announced a big funding round today, actually. So maybe Garrett has some thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any thoughts related to that specifically, but just thinking about the audience, a big misconception that I think we all have, and I know that will agree with, is that we just assume that the adults know what they're doing, when in most cases they don't. I tell my students and myself, I remind myself that if you read 7 books on a topic, you can have a high quality conversation and probably even teach an expert a thing or two. So really, everything is, just held together by duct tape. So just read a lot, reach out to people, and start something crazy. That's what we did.
Absolutely. And Garrett, maybe just for the background of the folks here, if this funding round was publicly disclosed, do you care to maybe talk about like if this was your first fundraise or if this has been not your first fundraising, how has that been in terms of what you thought it was going to be versus what it ended up being?
Yeah, it was publicly announced today. I guess the craziest thing was just watching, the VC hype engine, as I'm sure you all have heard about. I got extraordinarily lucky, sorry about that. I got super lucky where we're an education company in the COVID era. It's probably the most fertile ground to fundraise in history of ever. But as soon as people get excited about what you're working on, they tell their friends, and then we had, I think one week we had like 150 inbound emails from VCs, just like stupid stuff. So that was surprising to me, but it was overall a super fun experience. Got to meet some people I never thought I would meet. So very enjoyable.
Very cool. Now, Will, Jomayra, Madison, I don't know if any of you were one of those 150 people to reach out, but either in the ed tech space or the spaces that your individual firms focus on, did you find anything odd about coming into your job maybe that you initially wouldn't have guessed?
I think one that surprised me was that, sorry, Jomayra, panelists virtually, it's challenging to tell when people are talking next, was just that VCs sell to entrepreneurs, right? Like, I think you watch Shark Tank and it's just them saying, no, no, no. And these entrepreneurs are like begging for money. And it's just not true. Like in venture, we're competing against other venture funds, although competing is a strong word, but sometimes the best companies have multiple offers for investment. And so I think I was surprised that just because you're on that side of the table, it doesn't really get any easier than I think the entrepreneurs either. So it's been fun for me to learn like how to get to know entrepreneurs and try to tell them why we think Defy is going to be able to help them build their business.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think the only other thing I would add is I think one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to venture is that the job is writing checks. And that is probably 0.0001% of the job. Most of the job is doing a ton of work of selling, doing a ton of diligence, and actually the vast majority of it, especially if you're in early stage, is just helping companies grow. And so if you don't get energy from that, and if you don't get excited about that, like this is not a job that you're going to find really fun and rewarding, especially because it tends to be a job that takes up a lot of time and requires you to be on almost all the time because of the nature of what Madison was saying, which is you're always selling. And so I think that's often the biggest misconception when I talk to folks that are interested in getting to venture is there's this belief that it's like this glamorous lifestyle where you're basically just writing checks and that's the extent of it. And maybe that's true if you've been in the industry for 20 years and you've had like, your Shopify exit and you're still sitting on your like multi-millions of dollars, but it's not true, especially when you're just starting off in your career.
I love that. That's such a really good point.
Yeah,
how hard you work as trying to help build these companies alongside the amazing entrepreneurs.
I got to have a really cool role. Previously, like I said, I came to see, and one of my jobs was working bridge between startups, which is a very fun job sometimes. Like it was a very I don't know if it'll ever come around again, but I had a ton of fun doing it. But again, it exactly like what you said, it's like VCs are there to help you out. And sometimes it's like, I remember when I first came in, it's really scary and it was almost like a divide. Like you're either on the startup side or the VC side. I definitely thought that when I was first coming up. A lot of my friends are in VC now. Like it's like a good look and like it's a good, you have also like a slight little bit of masochism because it's like, it is hard work and it's not always glamorous and fun. Like it, shows, but is anything?
I think one thing that's always been interesting to me is just like the incredible variety of how many shapes and sizes that great people and founders can come through. I think that like there's kind of this common platitude that founder matters more than everything, right? In terms of like team versus the product in the market. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. So for example, Garrett and his co-founders, right, were like, so many people early on when thinking of like going and trying to invest, right, we're wondering like, okay, well, like education is really hard, right? And there's like incredibly connected and powerful and experienced people that like try to build charter schools, for example, and then get stopped, right? And so it's like, why are you guys the ones to go do that? And there's no easy answer there, right? But I think that like at the end of the day, like if you have some sort of unique obsession with that, then it just kind of works, and it's worked well, the past couple of years for Sora. I think another example is one of my favorite portfolio companies is like, it's a dog food brand, right? And I think that like, when I say that, a lot of people wonder, super crowded space, not that interesting. There's not really any tech there. And like in general, I think you're right, actually, right? It's like a hard thing to do, and most of those companies are just not interesting at all. But this founder, Katie, she did like MIT engineering undergrad. She works as a product manager for a couple of years, and then she quits her job to go dog walk full time for a year, right? And it's like, how many MIT engineer product managers do you know like quit to do like manual labor for a year? Like basically nobody, right? And so I think this is one of these great examples where I would have never have predicted we would have invested in a dog food brand, and yet we found somebody who was just like super talented, and we did it, and they've been killing it lately. And so I think it's good lesson that like you never really know what's going to work, and I think that all the rules are basically just kind of made up and not really relevant.
Just want to quickly add on that, since Will mentioned me, I want to mention Contrary. People, when people see where Contrary is at now, and they have this pretty impressive deal flow and the portfolio is killing it. But just a few years ago, when I watched it happen, Eric was absolutely, grinding like crazy. He was driving to every single top 50 college in the US multiple times, Will, right? Yeah, he's doing some crazy stuff. So even though you don't know what's going to work, you can be pretty confident that it's going to involve some insane amounts of grinding. So we drove to all like our first over a course of a year to all of our like 200 first prospective families, sit in the living room and talk to them. Like, it's going to be insane. It's not going to be like the Social Network movie, I promise you.
Of course, and not to put in a shameless plug or anything, but we are viewing the Social Network movie here. So if you want to see a little bit about what the world doesn't look like, feel free to join panelists and hackers tonight to watch the Social Network with us. Now, Garrett, I think I actually want to hold on to that thought in terms of sort of spaces changing and having to really grind out to, just find what works. I think it's pretty unanimous that COVID has kind of thrown an interesting wrench in a lot of industries. I'll speak with sort of my own industry per se. The traditional hackathon model is totally different now. Instead of having to somehow find people to fly out from San Francisco to Boston for a hackathon for a weekend, suddenly, Michael Siegel can be taking a call from the comfort of his own home. But then yet again, there are people currently where it's probably 3-4 a.m. right now, and they're just really excited for this talk, but are battling with time zones. And there's a whole world of issues and solutions that sort of come out due to COVID. And so I guess my question, Garrett, starting with you, and I think I want to see everyone's opinion on this, is how has the way you have approached your job, the way that your company or your firm operates, how has it changed for the better or for the worse as a result of COVID? And is this a temporary change, or is this a lasting change that's going to happen once COVID is solved, hopefully?
Right, so we do our best to screen out what we call COVID kids, so people who are just looking for the quickest port over from the COVID experience into their traditional school. We want people who, through this experience, have recognized that school isn't fundamentally broken and now are looking to make a permanent change. So we've just kind of been continuing our growth, what we even was before COVID. Nothing really huge accelerated because we filter them all out. We just have a lot more filtering to do, honestly. In terms of the company, we've always been remote. I feel like you all, the rest of you are just catching up now.
Great. Would anyone, I'm sure most of our VC funds and likely Neurable as well, seeing that it's kind of more on the hardware side, it's probably in person. How has your way of working maybe changed? Mary, Erin?
I've got a couple of things. So Neurable, I'm still fairly new. I've kind of been here like it's 2 months now. But I kind of was watching from afar and knew some of the team from afar. So one thing that I had initially reached out, and the conversation had joined like a couple months before I actually joined, but they were Neurable is based in Boston, and that was a big like, ooh, can we make this work when I very first started the conversation? And came from working 100% remote, had worked at a global e-commerce company, global e-commerce startup, and had done a lot of work in that sphere. So it was very much like, we can do this. Let's go. Like, for a hardware team, a neuroscience hardware team, there's some very unique challenges. Like, have people who are testing in a lab and have to be mindful of COVID precautions, and most of us, but there are, like, for me, I'm on the marketing side, like I can operate remotely, I can exist remotely, and it's like these new challenges. So I think there was a lot of intention. From a marketing perspective, I think it's very fun, and a communications perspective, it's really fun, because guess what we're all doing, like, way too long probably, is we're all hanging out on the internet. And it's, it's like, before you'd be like, oh, is this person gonna go on a hike this weekend? Are they gonna go to a Super Bowl party? It's like, nope, you are online. And so kind of thinking of creative ways that people are gathering, or new habits that have formed in this pandemic. And I think Garrett put it really well. There's like all those kind of this concept of like, what's happening because of COVID that's just going to go away after COVID, and what's happening for long-term sustainable projects that'll stay. So I research personally a lot on like solopreneurship, and something that was a huge boom because of COVID. So I was researching this pre-COVID, then, COVID happened, and trend that happened is a lot of journalists lost their job because media business models are outdated. But what we're seeing is like, people are realizing, if it's done correctly, this is a new option. So kind of filtering out like what changes, what doesn't, and incorporating like what practices can you evolve. So like, again, at the core root, a lab's a much difficult situation to go remote, but what aspects, like, sourcing for people to come into a lab, or, explain G without being in person, how can you do that in different ways? So kind of looking at those long-term changes.
Yeah, I think definitely been doing a lot more Zoom than any of us thought in our lifetime. Zoom or video conference, I should say, not to be specific. But I think venture has traditionally been a in-person industry traditionally, but it's just still remained a person industry, if that makes sense. And so while it's become more virtual, I think it's enabled us to meet people from all over the country in a way that we probably wouldn't have prior, because of the barrier to entry, so to speak, has been so much, was so much higher. Now it's much lower. And I think we've taken the stance that in a time when there's much upheaval and disruption, opportunity grows. So we've been actively investing, and it's been interesting to get to see how people's minds are turning, both in isolation and being sparked by these crises that are massively allowing us to, forcing us and allowing us to rethink what's the new normal. So I think ultimately it is an exciting time in technology and in venture and entrepreneurship, although recognizing that it is also a difficult season, all in the same.
Yeah, and, Jomayra and Will, sorry to interrupt before you go in. I'd love to hear a little bit more from you two on that point that Madison had, just trying to understand what is the new normal. I think that's a great way to phrase it, that the temporary changes are sort of like they'll go away once we have a vaccine. But what things are we learning today that is going to change the way we work in the future? I'd love to hear, Jomayra and Will, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to just take a quick stab at that. So I think there are two different new normals to talk about. One is the way that we do our work as VCs, and then the other one is how we think about industries and sectors and the way that's changing. In terms of how we do our work as VCs, I have to admit, at first we were nervous and worried about this idea of not being able to meet in person. And can you write a check when you don't have the energy and the magic of meeting someone in person? And I made an investment earlier this summer where I actually spent more time with the founder than I've probably spent with any time, like any investment I've ever made before, because it was so easy to hop on a Zoom. Like I met with him the first time on a Monday morning. 2 hours later, I was like, I love this. Can we please talk again? The next morning we talked again. And I felt like I got to know him a lot better during this time, just by nature of like quantity, and also just like being okay and feeling okay doing like a more casual meeting, because I knew there wasn't the craziness of having to schedule it and meet in person. And then he was in the Bay Area. So we did a I gave the term sheet, and then we did a socially distant meetup in San Francisco. And the only thing I learned about him was that he was 6'7", which was insane. You couldn't tell on Zoom, but like, that's the only thing I really learned. Other than that, like my perception of the company and of him didn't change at all. And so I think like in terms of new normal for VCs, I think like we're starting to realize like the in-person thing was cool and it was fine, but it doesn't really add that much value in terms of your perception of a company. And we can make investments without meeting folks in person. And then there's a new normal in terms of investing. And I totally agree. I think with what everyone is saying is that we're calling it kind of the second hour problem, where like in COVID, people found a second hour in the day. And like, we started to see this heat around a ton of new consumer social opportunities and consumer social apps. And for us, we're like trying to stay away from making investments in things that don't feel like they're going to exist post-COVID. I think one example, which folks may or may disagree with, but that we saw a whole rise of online virtual fitness opportunities during COVID, and that were like basically just like a better version of for YouTube videos. And for us, we were like, there's a reason why people like doing in-person classes. Like there's a social component to it. There's value in that. There is something about that people enjoy. And unless you like change the consumer experience with it, like just purely doing like a better version of YouTube videos doesn't make a ton of sense to us. And so like for us, like there are like more fundamental shifts, especially like in the nature of how we think about doing work. Like people are more fine with like remote work. And so there is a real opportunity there that we feel like has been accelerated in this time period. People are more interested in, as Erin was saying, with solo entrepreneurship or freelancing or independent work. And so we think that there are real changes happening in the workforce as a result of it. But there's a lot of things that are like tinkering at the edges that we think will probably just snap back to normal post-COVID.
Yeah, all very well said, Jomayra. I think kind of a couple things that have been interesting for us are that like, I think a lot of the tailwinds here are going to last for years, right? We've got a couple companies doing like digital health, for example, right? And sales, as you can imagine, have been a lot of interest these days. This is probably going to carry on for years at a time as people realize that, they need to kind of build more kind of long-term robust solutions for things. I think a little bit on the ground or kind of the other side though. I think one thing we've noticed is that, first of all, there's a lot of people who are like taking time off of school or gap years or whatever to go work on companies or that kind of stuff. I think there's also a lot of people who we're seeing are just kind of using the time to like do work, right? And I think like the lines between school and work will blur a bit, where like, if you can go do an internship remotely from like, the cornfields of Champaign, Illinois, right, where you're a CS student or whatever, right? So, there's nothing really stopping you from getting experience and making a lot of money like while you're in the city with your friends, right? And so I think we've seen a lot of people try to go merge those things. I'm sure Garrett can probably test that in some ways too, with like the Sora's focus on kind of their own educational philosophy. But I think that's one of the things that's kind of hard to understate as people think through like how do you as a college student like learn and grow, right? How do you go get connected with people? How do you go like build your own career? I think there's a lot of questions that are have been answered the same way for a long time that I think are now just starting to change a bit.
I think that's a great point, and I just kind of chime in on something that you said. I think founders and VCs and industry is a really exciting. I love it because it's like we're so experimental and we want to learn. Like this industry is filled with people who genuinely love learning. I got a really cool opportunity this year, and I got to take on an intern from New Zealand. So I was based in New York, and I had someone I worked with from New Zealand in like February. And it was his first time being a developer. And I was like teaching, I was like, this is great. Like, let me hook you up with our dev team. And it worked wonderfully. And it was an experience that I don't know that anybody would have been open to pre-COVID. Like, I don't know that someone would be like, yeah, let's take on a remote intern person from New Zealand. Like that just wouldn't happen.
And I don't think it's ever going to go back, to Will's point. So like I was talking to Amir, CEO of OutSchool, yesterday. They have gobs and gobs of money. Let me tell you, if any of you are familiar with what OutSchool is, but even they're like, they announced yesterday they're never going back to an in-person office. They're remote first for the future, because I'm trying to remember the terminology that, was it Brex? They're like, if the medium is the message, like if you craft the medium, you can supercharge, you give your office superpowers. And we say that about our school too. We're online first, which gives us superpowers that in-person schools can't imagine. So it's never going back. It's going to be more of a blend.
Absolutely. I think we've touched on some amazing points. What I really enjoy from this panel is even amid such confusing and sort of unclear waters, I really appreciate that we all are trying to understand how do we not only make the best of it to get by, but how do we really take advantage of sort of this new ability to ask different questions. Will, I know that you spoke about a lot of students considering taking time off, and as someone who's also taking a year off doing my own thing, it is really encouraging, and I'm sure a lot of other students here that are considering, blurring that line between work and school. Really great that that there's some mutual support on that side. I think I wanted to, and by the way, I am, to all the participants here, I am selfishly going to guide this conversation in a way that I think all the panelists would like, and selfishly how the questions are that I'm interested in asking to you folks. But I guess, Will, you had spoke about kind of how the network since COVID has really, there's been an influx. Just the amount of output generated by people by virtue of having more time, less commute time. The second hour, I think, Jomayra, you referred to it as. It's certainly brought a lot more startups and VCs to have to ask difficult questions of, do I fund, this greater quantity of startups or not? The question that I'm wondering now is, and perhaps this question has always been asked and is only being further deepened because of COVID. What do you look for as a startup in terms of picking the right investor? With the amount of VCs out there, and we talked about how Shark Tank has totally got it wrong sometimes. It's sometimes VCs competing for the right companies. I'd like to flip the question maybe. So maybe Erin and Garrett, and feel free for the rest of the VC folks to chime in. What do you look for, given the potential bubble that we may be in finding the right investor?
Okay, I'll start. You need a few, litmus tests, if you will, where you can say, here's what will drive my business forward. Here's what's blocking me. Of course, capital is going to be one thing blocking you since you're raising money. Don't raise money unless you're capital constrained. Advice to everyone. So just have a few other tests. What else am I constrained by? For Sora, we brought on some investors like Union Square Ventures and Village Global and Rethink Education, and each of them fit a need for the company. And I can't tell you what that is for your future company or your current company, but just don't run for the clout. We chose an education-specific investor over a couple generalist funds, because they provided value they didn't. So, I mean, I could dive into more specifics, but that's the generalist advice that applies to everyone.
Yeah.
Just to
Go for it. Well,
oh, yeah, I was just to jump in with one kind of learning that might be relevant for everybody. I think something that Garrett and team did really well early on was like getting angels before you took real institutional money, right? And I don't want to tell the story for you, but I think that could be one thing of like getting the right backers on your side and then raising more of like an institutional thing later on.
Yeah. So Sora never would have happened, and this frenzy last month never would have happened if we didn't have the angels who were telling the story for us. Everything from like the ASU GSV conference I did yesterday, like all these things just happened because you got someone who's experienced in the field who believes in you. So the best thing you can do for your company is not go pitch a bunch of VC funds. Sorry, sorry, VC funds. It's to find someone who's done the thing you want to do and convince them to give you a small check or take partial ownership or even just advisory shares, whatever it may be. Get them invested in with you. They'll move the needle forward more than any VC will. VCs will not change your company. I promise.
I think I'm going to echo that exactly, Garrett, because I think I'm leaning on my experience doing it, coming actually from a creative age. I got to see it. But again, we were writing the pitch decks, and I got to see it across 5 or 6 different startups, which was amazing because you get a little bit of a wider range and see kind of general. It usually worked out the best for people who need. So I think being real with yourself, like, this is my wants, this is my needs, and these are my nice to haves. Like, what does that list look like? And rank them. Like, if I don't get X tomorrow, we're in a problem. Like, and if we're fundraising, again, like, don't take money when you don't need money. What does that plan look like? And maybe you have a VC, maybe it's someone like the VC knows, or like the introductions they can provide. Don't underestimate. I got the really great advice from one of my personal mentors a couple weeks ago of like having not just a company board of directors, but a personal board of directors. Like, who do I go to when I need help? Like, who's my board of directors who's going to be like, Erin, you are not on the right path right now. Like, get back on that same path. Like, here's what you need. You need, whatever it is. Has helped me a ton in kind of building like a personal board of directors, but it's also made me make better decisions. Like, speaking on behalf of like, learning a lot, having done different, just design decks, and kind of making sure that you're able to tell the story of like, this is my wants, this is my needs, and these are my nice to haves, and really ranking them and being honest about yourself about what your weaknesses are.
Yeah, and just to double down on that, the personal board of directors is a really cool concept. And I think marrying that concept with the, presuppositions of what a VC fund adds, that's where places like Contrary really shine. So people who are willing to kind of partner with young people who are willing to answer the questions that you're too embarrassed to ask the adults, if you will, really look for that in an angel or your first institutional money.
Yeah, if they're gonna look at you like you're silly or you don't know anything, it's probably not a good fit. Like, it's okay to ask the question, and I hate the term common sense because common sense isn't that common, and what's common for one person is very much not common for someone else, and that's okay. We're all learning at different paces and different experiences, and that should be celebrated.
I think what you guys are all somewhat touching on in different ways is the value of people and people that you connect with and people that can help you at different stages along your journey of building your business. And those are angels, those are institutional investors, and those change and grow with time as you change and grow. But I would say that the factor that probably comes to mind as something we really value at Defy, and I think all venture capitalists do, is people who are founders who are uniquely enabled to build and solve for that particular opportunity in that particular moment. And it goes to say maybe there's nothing new under the sun, but sometimes there's a reason for what you're building now to take off at this moment, and how has your set of experiences enabled you to be that person. And then I think just one step behind that is having a product and a vision and a community that you're building that is going to change. And so having the great product market fit or a grasp of where the industry is going in a way that you're enabling delight and just a futuristic experience for your customers that they don't even know they want. And so coupling those things with people and product, to me, especially at the early stage, is really what sets apart companies that we take a look at.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add, I totally agree with the statement that Garrett made, that VCs aren't going to change your business, and they shouldn't. Like, we really, at the end of the day, like, we can't make your market bigger. We can't make your product better. We can't, like, there are so many fundamental things that we can't change. If you don't have fundamentally a great idea with a great team and a good company, like, first of all, we shouldn't be making the bet, and we're not going to change the direction in that way. What we can do is, if you pick the right partners, especially ones that complement you where you have weaknesses, or that provide a set of skills that you can't afford to hire right now, or because by nature of being an early stage company, you can't bring on that person, you're effectively getting that person on your board and as a partner with your company and giving up some equity for it. And hopefully, if they're a great partner to bring on board, they help supercharge your growth. They help you avoid like blind spots. They help you avoid they help to shorten the learning cycle for you so that you can get where you want to go faster, and with less stumbling blocks. And really that's what you're hoping to get. And so when folks like are looking for investors, and I agree, if you don't need money, you shouldn't take money. But if you need money to accelerate growth, find people that aren't the exact carbon copy of you, because that's not going to help you at all. It's not going to change. It's not going to help you with your blind spots. Find people that know the things that you don't know or you can't hire for right now.
That goes with hiring too, Jomayra. Don't hire people who have your same background. Doesn't help as much.
Totally.
And you have a team of folks from the same engineering school with the same degree, with all the same coding languages. You know, can't expect to build a diversified product or an interesting story. Very, very well said, everyone. I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit and get a little bit more personal in terms of all of our individual journeys and getting to kind of where we are. And I guess the guiding question that I'm interested in is, what was sort of your first like big win where you kind of understood, like either at your company, you know, in terms of the success of your company, or in terms of your personal success with like relationship to other organizations. Can you identify any inflection points where things started to click and you kind of understood maybe who you're building for, what you're making, why you're making it? Just wondering, are there any key sort of moments in time that people should look out for or strive to build in their own lives? Love to hear anyone's thoughts on that.
I have a really good personal one I remember. So when I was looking kind of for new role, figuring out what that next fit was, I was able to say no and not doubt it. So I, you know, had about 5 offers on the table, anything from marketing, head of community, you know, back in a newsroom, and was looking at kind of a different role. And I was able to sit down and be like, no, like that doesn't feel good. Like that is not where I see myself going down a path. And I think that was a personal like product market fit, and identifying like I do want to be in startups. Like I do like what I'm doing. I do like innovation. I do love early stage. I genuinely believe in what, you know, these organizations are doing. And I think just that confidence and like that work history, to be able to say no. And it took me, you know, a while to figure that out, but I think that's a good like personal one of like, can you say no and feel really confident in doing that? Because I think that takes a lot, just to saying no, like right out of college, I would have accepted the first job you offered me. Like, or it's like, even in my younger, like having started kind of my own thing as well in the past, like the first I would have jumped at, but almost knowing when to sit and merit.
I want to just quickly, for my own life, challenge the premise of the question, which is, despite, you know, what I told investors in our pitches, and a couple of you have heard my pitch, but the only thing, I guess this gets at a larger issue where we have this founder worship thing that goes on in the entrepreneur community, where we're like, there was a moment where the skies opened up and God himself, you know, blessed me. And like, that's not what happens. It's just a bunch of little small steps that you take that were really hard. So the only difference between people in the panel and everyone, or people in the audience and people on the panel, is just like 1,000 little hard things. So just start doing one and eventually you'll get there. It was no big divine moment.
For sure, it took a lot of taking the first opportunity to get to the point I could say no.
That was just my own life. I don't know how it worked for you guys, but
Oh no, I fell on my face a few times.
yeah, I love that concept of it wasn't one specific day where like the sun was shining down upon us. Rather, it's sort of the everyday. And I love I'd love to emphasize that, you know, the difference between those that are on the panels and those of us in the audience, aside from maybe a number of years, is a lot of us are college students, is just the number of times we've tried. And you know, Erin, I'm sure for as many times you've fallen on your face, few of those times have worked out really well. And I think I'd encourage everyone to fall on their face more often, is kind of what I'm hearing. Is that kind of what you're talking about, Garrett?
Yeah. If using Erin's analogy, just revel in the pain. Every time you fail, you learned, get back up, do it again.
Yeah, I would just add too, I think for me, like successes, if you can call them that, in my career thus far have come when I've asked for something that no one necessarily handed. And this was how I ended up finding and sourcing my first deal with Defy, which is in the world of venture kind of like an important benchmark of you that you can do as a young person in VC is like, oh, I sourced this. I met this founder and I brought them into our firm. And how that happened with this company, Thrilling, was that when I was at Gap, this female founder had spoken on this panel about sustainability and supply chain and kind of the future of vintage and secondhand. And I just had this massive girl crush on her. I was just like, you seem so cool. She's building this business. Maybe I want to go work for her. I just want to meet her. And so afterwards I went up and I said, can we please chat and like, get coffee? She's like, I have to go back to LA today, but yeah, no problem. Like, here's my email. And so I just met her and was like, I just really think you're super interesting. And so kept getting to know her. And then 6 months later found myself in a venture role where now I was in a different position to be actually able to say, hey, are you fundraising? Like, I still love your company. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to work together in this capacity. And it turned out the timing was great. What they're building is helping to bring vintage retailers online through one consumer platform. And at a time when small businesses like vintage clothing stores weren't open, they've had a lot of tailwinds, and it hits my areas of expertise from Gap. And so just the stars aligned, so to speak. And so I wouldn't say it was a sun shining down moment, but the idea that I just really liked this person. I was drawn to her and her vision and asked to get to know her better. And she generously gave me that time. Is consistently been a way in which I've helped open doors for myself in a way that I think all of you can do. So I'd encourage you to like reach out to one of us if you think you like our story and it resonated with you, or if you just meet someone in school that you think is someone you'd want to co-found a company with, like why not? And kind of take that approach to building and starting your early career.
Yeah, someone aligned to what Madison is saying. There is no God shining light moment. I just push back on that idea fully. But over time, I have come to believe that in investing, you have to earn the right to invest in a market. I think sometimes investors come in, especially younger investors come in and they're like, okay, I have to be good at everything. I have to source everything. Like, I just have to have all the coverage in the world. And I think like that is the easiest and fastest way to effectively be good at nothing. And there's so much power in saying, you know what, there are one or two spaces that I'm incredibly good at. In the case of Madison, her Gap experience was so helpful in her sourcing and winning this deal. And so similarly, like coming in and like earning the right to invest in a market, building your network in that market so you actually can be helpful, you know what good looks like, I think is critical. And it took me some time to kind of understand that and really internalize that. But I think it was an important learning for me in my career.
I want to quickly mention something that Will told me a couple of years ago, which is a strong metric to judge yourself on is positive actions per day, where school brainwashes us into thinking about, what's my next assignment? Oh, I don't have an assignment right now. I guess I'm on standby. That's not really how the world works. So instead, you can optimize for these learning, for these failures, these falling on your face moments, to Erin's point, just by taking positive actions per day. If you're not on standby, no one's going to tell you how to change the world.
I think like now on that point, like now that I've entered a more senior role and like I have universities, I've gotten a really cool opportunity to kind of be on that other side of it. I think the number one thing, kind of to your point, Garrett, is what I love, especially in college students, coming I love seeing when people are really excited. So my favorite thing is like if students email me and they're like, I love this. I'm like, boom, like, when can we meet for coffee? Like, what are we doing? The ones that are like, hey, can we connect for like 30 seconds? I'm like, you excited about, like, I don't even care if it's something that I don't know. Like if you're like, I like rocket science, and I'm like, well, I don't know anything about rocket science, but I know people know about rocket science. So like, let me make that introduction for you. Like, don't be afraid of being excited. Some of the best advice I got was, it's okay, like whatever you are nerdy about, go chase that. Like go be a nerd, and that's cool. Go be obsessively into something. That's really cool.
You're here on that. I think IvyHacks is a great time for folks to, if they don't have something that excites them, or if they already came into something that particularly riles them up in some way, this is a perfect time to just do a little experiment and put that first foot forward to see if they're interested in pursuing these ideas, and if they ever actually like want to make it blossom into something bigger. I think we touched on some amazing things. We talked about how really, COVID or not, the focus has been and always will be people. We talked about how you need to sort of have a bi-directional relationship in VC and startup world. It's not really as sort of Shark Tank as it may look out to be. We talked about how the medium is a message, and how positive actions per day as opposed to waiting on standby for somebody else to come and give you the golden key to solve your problems. Taking action for yourself is incredibly important. This is only, scratching the surface of the amazing topics we brought up. And I think on behalf of the organizing team and on behalf of all of our hackers, to everyone here, I really appreciate your time. And I hope everyone learned something from these amazing folks in front of us. So, in typical Zoom fashion, we'll give a very quiet round of applause because there's only 6 of us that can unmute, but thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you.